They are definitely there, everybody, and we are very close to time for live stream. So I'm just going to leave.
Close the app out.
Just going to leave. Thank you.
People that can type with more than 2 fingers.
Okay, thank you, councillors. We are on live stream, and I'll just say welcome to everybody who has made the effort to be here today. Great to see the fairly full turnout. Welcome Reverend Cook on Zoom, and welcome to those members of the public who have also joined us on live stream. I'll just remind everybody at the start of this workshop that workshops are not for decision making. They are simply for councillor discussion and for giving direction to staff on any paper that we wish to be produced following the workshop, but they are not for decision making purposes. Reminder to councillors, but also to those public who have joined us on live stream. Michelle, I'll just ask what apologies we have this morning. So apologies from Councillor Campbell and from Councillor Kett. If I can have someone to, thank you, Councillor Stewart, Councillor Bond. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you. Okay, we will get straight into the meat of the review of the long-term plan, etc. I'm presuming, Rhiannon, you're going to do a few minutes there, and then we'll pass over to Michael and our finance manager.
Yes, so I'll hand straight over to the Chief Executive. The purpose of today's meeting is to review the starting position, where we were at in year 2 for the long-term plan, look at the decisions ahead of us for the annual plan, review those savings options that were discussed in the January workshop, and then to look at fees and charges. So the intention is that I'll be able to bring that paper to you in February for the decisions that you want to make for the annual plan.
Thank you, Chair. I'll have the joy shortly of handing over to the third person, and sadly there's no one at the end of that chain, so they'll have to continue with the rest of the workshop.
Thank you, Mr. CEO.
Having noted that, there has been some amendments in relation to the slides that are sitting in the public pack. So we've brought into a few of the slides, and I'll go through one of the slides towards the end, but the other slides will giving you the context in relation to the original 8.5, so Patricia will take you through that so we can really understand what actually drove the original increase in the year 2. Then there's another one that will be taking you through just about where we've got to, and that's later on in relation to it, so where staff's current position is with the splitting out. So we stopped in public last time at splitting it out. We've got in the public showing what the next components are once it's split out. Obviously we do have still all the detail in relation to those slides in public excluded. Just a reminder, when we go through those, all of those details are linked to contracts. There's only one item not linked to a contract, hence why they are all in publicly excluded. So just wanted to highlight those.
Thank you.
On that note, I'll hand over to Patricia, who'll take you through the first few slides, and I'll jump back in for one.
Okay, thanks. So where we're going to start this morning is a bit of a look backwards before we go forward. Now, the whole concept of the long-term plan is that we set out a budget for 3 years really, really well, and then the next 7 of that 10-year period in LTP, we know that's more going to be likely to change. So sitting in year 2 of an LTP is when we set the rate, when we struck the LTP back in June last year, we were pretty much said we were going to have rates increases of 8.5 in year 2 and approximately, I think it was 8.5 in year 3 as well, from memory. So looking back now, 6 months on or 8 months on, we need to have a look at what really drove those. And we've listed those up there for everyone to see. Inflation is the biggest component on a one piece, but actually when we take into account depreciation and the funding of our increased capital program. Now we have to have a look back at our financial strategy and our infrastructure strategy. The LTP that we've just adopted was one about setting a course of direction to make sure that this council had good infrastructure, but also was making sure that we were funding them and making sure we had good depreciation funding in that place to get to a balanced budget position. Those are the key parts that really influence that 8.5%. And we're saying there 1.72% is just as related of additional debt interest and repayments as we start bringing on those increased capital programs. We've gone back and had a look, and we've been sitting around the 25 million was the highest year up until about 4 years ago, where we started to hit high 40s and 50 million. That has the impact because that hasn't been funded predominantly from reserves, it's been funded predominantly from borrowing. So that's coming through now as we have to rate for the interest costs, but also making sure that we're rating for the repayment of that debt so that doesn't become a burden in later years. So that's where we got about the where we got to in the 8.5. But as you'll also see there were some operational changes, and we'll detail those on the next slide. But we're going through a period of significant change in our regulatory environment, and so those are coming through as we were making best guesses, I will say, or educated guesses about where that would go in year 2. And as we'll go through later this morning, that's been slightly out. The other aspect that we've got in there was that we actually reduced that 8.5 by 2.43. So it was much higher, we were over 10%, or nearly 11%, by rate smoothing. Now that's, to many and to the public listening, that's a foreign concept. So essentially what we're saying is that in years 1 and 2 of the LTP, our rates were going to be much higher. So we've taken some of that rates increase and put it onto the latter years, so that we build up over time to the rates level that we need to operate the organisation and deliver the services that we have said we would deliver to the city. So that's where that 2.43 rate smoothing comes down. So you'll recall as we went through that long-term plan development, we were seeking much higher rates in both year 1 and 2, but we smoothed them out by pushing them out into the outer years, so to spread that burden. So this next slide looks at what that 0.09 operational change. So that nets down to approximately $70,000. But there was a lot of things that make that up, and we would, with a lot of things that needed to be added in. The biggest being added in was the museum. We have to start rating for the operations. We now have staff, operational staff starting to be employed. We have to be ready to open it when we said we were going to be ready, and that has an impact. We also have some regulatory impacts as well. So every 3 years we have an election year, but we have to then fund the cost of that election. So that increases, that's the difference between year 1 and 2, entirely budgeted for. We also, there's the increase in ETSs and waste levies in the solid waste area. We've also factored in the adjustment in the NZTA draft indications on that funding aspect, and also there is going to be a change in the National Public Transport Ticketing System, which the costs associated with that were factored in. But also when we looked at all the other little changes to make room for all that other stuff, there was 2.62% of savings and efficiencies and additional revenue that was added in so that we got down to that position. So what this really shows is that in order to get a budget for any year, things are moving around. We're taking from some places, we're adding, we're looking for efficiencies, we're looking at additional revenue in order to get that net cost, because really what rates is the net cost. It's the missing gap. We've got revenue from our user fees and other charges. We've got the cost of everything and the balance that we need to get to the balanced budget, or in that case for year 2, not quite a balanced budget, is what we're seeking in rates.
Thank you, Patricia. That's no councillors have any questions at this point. Councillor Dermody.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of clarification points. Could you give us a bit more colour to the depreciation funding? What's included in that?
So traditionally, Invercargill City have not fully rated for the cost of depreciation across its asset base. As part of the infrastructure and finance strategy, we sought to move to increase that funding over time so that we made sure depreciation was fully rates funded, because we use that as the basis of this is what today's users need to pay to use that infrastructure asset. So we had been quite low. We had moved water up to 100%. Some of our others were sitting much lower. And so that was over 3 years we would move them all up to 100, or in the case of roading up to 80%.
So what's the impact on the cash position though? Because we're rating, so we're getting that cash in.
Correct.
Is that transferring through to the operational component of the infrastructure, or does it go through to the capital in terms of servicing debt?
It will go through to the net debt position.
Net debt, okay, thank you. And then the second
Thank you. Councillor Dermody, can I just remind all councillors to pull your microphone as close as possible? Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, and then the next one, just with the NZTA draft indications adjustment, 0.67, what is that to do? They changed their funding model, so we picking up what we need to do and rating.
Correct.
Like a footpath, for example.
Yes, that adjustment's for.
Right, okay, thank you.
Michael, you had a comment there.
Just wanted to add to that depreciation discussion, what Patricia has alluded to is a small component, or probably about a third in relation to it. The main component that's actually driving that is the fact that you've got an increase asset base being generated by a bigger capital program. So 200% of your capital programs, then increasing the depreciation that we need to charge for. And the third item is the cost of the actual capital is going up, so the value of the items we've currently got is now higher, which is meaning depreciation's higher. So 3 things kind of working against, but it's on the principle in local government, depreciation is an assessment of use.
Yeah.
So we've got a rate for it. So
Thank you, good reminder there. Okay, move on to the next slide.
So one of the items I think from council's perspective we needed to bring to the forefront and just to highlight is the impact of 1225, and nothing I'm going to talk to you about in these slides is not already public, so it's probably the first time, however, that public has seen it at a current point in time, everything being brought together as we go through, because it'll be no surprise that when you're putting in a new service, because we closed the museum, so therefore it stopped being a service that we were providing. We had very little of our staff remaining in relation to supporting the collection. Therefore, we are putting back in a brand new service from perspective of your rating. So going through that, we've added in, so far you've got your storage facility and the Tuataram facility. Both those have already added on to the rating base in the previous year. So the numbers we talk about here are talking about consecutive years, although we've also got in here what is the direct impact into 25-26, just to highlight that it is in there. It is a new service, it's an impact in relation to we must rate for it. So the capital component, having to borrow for obviously council share in relation to that investment. You can see there already we've spent up to, by the end of this year we will have spent up to 38 million. From a rating perspective, 5 million worth of subsidies so far, but more attracted in the future years. That's giving a total impact just on the capital component of 1.68 for the next year, the annual plan position. From an operating expenses, as you heard, we're now in the position we need to start bringing on the operating staff to get ready for the opening. We're doing that as kind of from a financial as slow as we can to able to manage that, but also from perspective of making sure the staff are trained and ready to open that facility on time. So that's approximately 3.02% of the rates impact. So just highlighting those combined items add up to, 1.34. Those combined add up to approximately 3% impact on their own in relation to new services being provided. Since the closure of the museum, looking back at what we've rates impact since then and the new costs coming through, the rates impact throughout those years and through the LTP time is actually 8.76. So it's got quite a significant rates impact just on its own. Like I remind everyone, this has already been in the public domain. It's whether it's been seen together in one place is probably what's I'm bringing forward in relation today. Wanted to highlight this because we'll go through shortly where we're at from a rating perspective, but the reason this needs to be highlighted is it does, from a council operations perspective, this is something we're aware of and we're trying to lower the cost implications in relation to this. We're trying to manage it across to not have a significant impact in relation to bringing on new services. I also highlight it because it will be one of the nuances with any rates capping component that comes through. Bringing on new services will be an implication into rates capping, and you will need to try and manage those accordingly. You also noticed in the previous slide the regulatory items. It's highly likely they won't be in a rates capping. We do not know, and that's something government will work through in relation to what's in, what's out. But most things that are linked to government directions in relation to levies, etc., where they're trying to indicate or give some direction to local government, those items will be unlikely to be in the rates cap. Hence why they are very purposely itemised and called out in relation to the items that you saw on the previous slide and going forward. I'll pause there for any questions.
Councillors, any questions? No, keep going.
Sorry, Leslie, I can't find the hands up facility on my screen, but I do have a question or a comment, perhaps. Just given that a new facility, such as storage facility and the Tuatara facility, were incorporated into the old museum, and there were operating costs for that. Overall, are we facing increased costs for those two facilities to run, or so this is operations as opposed to staffing, or are we reasonably cost neutral on that side of things? Because I would have thought that paying the operation costs of the old building should have been at least as much, if not more, than the two new facilities.
Through yourself, Chair, the answer to that would be no. There will be increased costs associated to them because they are on their three sites as opposed to one, which has been highlighted through public consultation. The other aspect I would highlight is there was a rates decline in relation to that coming off when the museum shut down, but we have to restock those rates or re-put the rates back on as it comes back on. The big one, of course, is when it was operating, it was also collecting revenues. We're under the revenue policy, this is also something that's an issue for us because no revenues coming in for the museum is actually causing us a breach in our revenue policy, which has been highlighted through annual reports and etc. Until that's fully operational and we've got revenue coming in, we don't actually know what that net effect will be at that time. We're hoping it will be closer to neutral, but we've already planned and expecting that it will have some uplift in the cost side of it, but not hugely significant. But it's timing in relation to that. We will hope that there'll be a drop down when those revenues kick in as well.
Madam Chair, I was not referring to the museum facility. I was just looking at the two facilities that already exist and the operating costs of those as opposed to anything else. But thank you for your answer, Ms. Chief Executive.
Before I ask Councillor Crackett for her question, I'll just make the comment about the storage facility and remind everybody that previous to the storage facility we now have, we had what could be described as an unsatisfactory storage under the roof of the old museum, which did not amount to the service or the much improved conditions we now have at the new storage facility. Councillor Crackett, you had a question?
Just a quick question. Those revenue streams for the new facility, are they being modelled off the previous museum's business units with the cafe and the retail in there, or are they being modelled off other entities of a similar size?
Through yourself, Chair, no, they're not being directly modelled off the historical, because there's some new offerings that we're being able to provide. So the team are working through, we've got a commercial manager in there that's working through all the different types of revenue streams that we'll be able to attract. But yes, the cafe is obviously one of those components, but they're trying to think more broadly what other streams they can actually attract in relation to that. So being a little bit more innovative going forward, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, so that's the look backwards. Now to start looking forwards. So what's changed between where we were with the 8.5% in the LTP to where we sit now? Now this is a bit of a recap of where we were at the last one. So as we've said, explained, inflation has increased, or shall I say, hasn't decreased as quick as what we thought it was going to. So that is much higher. Insurance, the insurance market, which council has been working in, particularly in our liability insurances, has significantly increased. and we have a small change in interest expense and debt repayments. And then there's some additional savings and changes that we've made at the officer level, which brings us down to, with the economic environment updates and removing smoothing, brings us to an 11.9% rates increase. Now this bottom section is all in relation to Three Waters and regulatory changes. Now the local water done well proposals through central government and how they are moving weren't anticipated when we did the LTP. Based on the current guidance and bills being with feedback out at the moment, we will need to ring fence our Three Waters operation. That essentially means we need to run the Three Waters operations as if they are a commercial utility that covers its own costs and council charges for its services that it provides to that Three Waters operations. So we've called that a ring, just used the term ring fencing for that. Our current estimate of those costs or those services which the council organisation provides into Three Waters is 2.3 million. It has a zero impact on rates as we're looking at here as one combined entity, because it's taking 2.3 million of expenses from the rest of the organisation to which water will pay for, so revenue, so it nets out. There will be costs associated with implementing the ring fencing. We have factored some of these in and proposed to factor some of these into the annual plan, which is approximately 0.26% for a rates increase. And there is the potential that the next annual plan, so the 26-27 annual plan, may require us to do an LTP amendment. We are still working through that and through what the requirements in the Act around local water done well will mean, whether it will mean an audited LTP amendment. If it was to be an audit required, the cost of that on rates is 0.21. Now, the legislation that's been proposed also is stating that Three Waters needs to be fully funded, and so their depreciation, so the use of the assets, needs to be paid for at 100% of depreciation. At the moment, the annual plan has them at 180 and 80. We would propose, because by the start of the Three Waters being thing in this 1 July 27? 27, we need to have that up to 100%. So we'd take some of that jump in this next financial year, moving it to water at 100, stormwater at 90 and sewage at 90%. And then the government have already stated that there will be levies on Three Waters operations, both from the Commerce Commission and Te Mata Arawhai in relation to the regulation and pricing. Those total 0.39%. And then the other one, which is higher than anticipated, was that the Remuneration Authority has indicated that councillor and mayoral salaries will increase. That is a requirement put upon us by legislation and set. So that's based on the current indications, that's a 0.22% rates increase, which gets us to a total before mitigations of 14.76%. What staff propose, given the need for ring fencing of Three Waters, is that we shouldn't actually look at an overall rates increase anymore. And we should look at a rates increase for our Three Waters activities and a rates increase for our non-Three Waters activities. This recognises that Three Waters is traditionally a targeted rates base. You only pay for Three Waters if you receive it, and we've got large parts of the city's within the city's boundaries that do not have access to our water reticulation or our wastewater reticulation networks, so they don't pay for those rates. So to get a much better feel of where what your rates increase, it's much better to understand what your rates increases on your waters, and if you don't receive any of the 3 waters, what your rates increase is. So that's where the split. If we were to split that 14.76, it's a 24.07% increase to 3 waters on those targeted rates, and a 9.82% on non-waters. That's before any mitigations.
Any councillor questions? Councillor Boyle?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Patricia, the note ring fencing implementation cost, was that factored in before, or is that extra than you expected?
I think we had factored in any implementation costs in relation to 3 waters when we did the budgets, so that's additional on top of.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
Just in relation to that question, Chair, we couldn't do that anyway in the LTP because it would be preempting a council decision, so we had to wait for council to come through in relation to the direction.
That's right.
And all of the options council's given in relation to direction require us to ring fence, either to ring fence to pass on or ring fence to keep as an operation now. Hence why we've had to do it now, not previously.
Thank you.
Yep.
And just as a reminder, because of government decisions, we couldn't have preempted when we were preparing the long-term plan. Mayor Clark?
Yeah, just an add on to the previous question. I don't see where 2.3 million kicks in. So we've already got internally,
Mayor Clark, can you pull your microphone
sorry,
closer?
we've already got internally a division, I guess, that deals with 3 waters. If we were, for argument's sake, to, let's say, call that the ICC 3 water department, for want of a better words, it might require some managerial oversight, but we've already got dedicated ring-fenced rates heading towards them. I don't see where which is what Trish was asking, where the $2.3 million comes from.
Patricia?
I'll cover that, Chair. Just through the Chair, the 2.3 is corporate. It's currently sitting in your corporate activity. It is for the services to provide to the 3 waters. I'll remind Council that in the Morrison Low report they included the overhead component in their base numbers. We're working through with Morrison Low to get some adjusted numbers because they probably modelled it on a governance body as opposed to a fully operational, so we're working through them to get those numbers back to Council 100%. These numbers that you see here are modelled on Council providing finance, governance, comms. It's the full support component across through to the 3 waters entity. As you would with any entity, you've got to have those services provided, your finance, HR, etc. So that's what they relate to. No rates impact.
So Michael, just for clarity, even if our final 3 waters entity decision was an ICC alone entity, there would still be the need for the ring fencing and absolute transparency of the admin and organisational costs.
Absolutely, Chair. It's part of the legislation saying we have to charge all administration costs through as part of that ring fencing. It's part of their structural change component.
Thank you. Mayor Clark.
Yeah, just to follow on to that question. So if we are going to, probably by percentage, cost everything that's in the OPEX cost, so a certain percentage of the reception services will be dedicated to 3 waters, comms, management, finance, and the list goes on. If we're going to do that, then you'd expect to see on the non-3 water equation comparable drop-off. To me, it just seems that we're saying we've got $2.3 million coming in here, but over here on the non-3 water equation, I don't see $2.3 million coming out. Now, I can't believe that if we were setting up a new structure that would need more comm staff, more reception staff, more finance staff. I mean, they're doing it at the moment. It's just a matter of ring fencing.
Patricia and Michael.
I'll just remind Council, if you read this slide, this is the full Council position and there's 0 impact in relation to it. out to the right, we indicate what the changes will be for Three Waters and for non-Three Waters, and one is an increase and one is a decrease. Just highlighting there that that is exactly the case. There is zero impact in relation to the overall council rates impact in relation to that. It is splitting between user pays and general rates.
So just for clarity for those members of the public, it is clear on the slide, non-waters rate decrease 4.51%.
Thank you. That is correct.
Any other councillor questions at this point? Thank you. If we can move on.
Okay, so if we were to look at water by itself, so we start with that 24.07. What we're recommending is that we need to do some of the mitigations to bring that down. We are recommending that we do some rephasing of our capital program. When we look at the current year, the capital program and the LTP was proposing a capital delivery of between $70 and $100 million for the next 2 years. We recognise that that is unachievable based on our current position and the current market position, so we wish to rephase a number of capital projects that would have come in years 1 and 2 out into latter years, or just push them out a year or two into the years 3 and 4. That has the effect of delaying the borrowing for those projects, so therefore drops the rates requirement. And in relation to water, as part of water paying for water, the user fees requirement, we do have a number of customers in our water area that pay for their water. And so when we look at the new cost base, mainly through depreciation, the fees need to go up for water as well. And then we'll discuss that later on this morning. So that takes a further drop. And in relation to smoothing, when we split the LTP smoothing, was an increase for water and a decrease for non-waters. So that gets us to a proposed or suggested annual plan waters increase of 20.48%. Now, across the average residential household connected to Three Waters in the city, that's a rates increase of $220 for the year, which would bring their Three Waters rates to $1,297. That's just based on the average residential property. It can vary depending. Some people only have 1 or 2 of the waters, not all 3, and some will have all 3. So that's just a comparison for the purposes of assessing what that percentage means.
Okay, councillor questions. Councillor Dermody.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So, Patricia, the capital program, I think you said 70 million.
It was planned at 70. There was capital not completed
Yeah.
in the last year, which moved it actually up to about 100.
And that's all related, capital related to Three Waters?
That piece is.
Yeah,
We've got
the 70
similar
million is.
savings sitting in non-waters as well.
So what I'm just trying to understand, because you've applied the sort of reduction to Three Waters, 24 to 20, so how much has the capital program changed within the Three Waters component?
Through yourself, Chair, there is a typo there as I can read it. So our apologies, that should be a 3, not an N. On this particular slide, it is the Three Waters recommended capital changes on that particular slide.
Right.
Our apologies.
So just for clarity, what is the capital change? What were we planning in Three Waters, and now what are we planning in Three Waters?
Jamie's just going to dig it out.
Okay, thank you.
We'll come back to that.
From
Yes,
memory, it's around
councillors,
15 million.
If we can just have a pause here. I think what Rhiannon is reminding councillors is at the last workshop there was a slide with a lot more detail on this
Yes, if you
issue.
want all the detail of the proposed capital changes, they're all in your last slide deck from the last workshop, line by line.
So that will explain the 2.16 in more detail. And it emphasises the 2.16 is not a guess or a lower or higher figure. It's based on the reality of looking at the capital program. Mayor Clark, Councillor Dermody, that was all of your question. Mayor Clark?
Yep, so the mention, Patricia, was that you said that the impact of moving beyond years 1 and 2 would delay borrowing. But in a response that you gave to Councillor Dermody earlier, you said that when we rate for Three Waters, that money doesn't go to this year's capex, it goes into net debt. So if we've got money sitting in net debt, which is originated from Three Water rating, when we go to do some capital work, why are we borrowing? Now, I know that we haven't been rating at 100, we haven't been doing depreciation at 100%, and it might have only been 90%, so we won't be borrowing a huge amount, you wouldn't think.
We have to borrow a reasonable amount, given that we had, there's a couple of very large water projects sitting in there, and the waters are not sitting with very positive net debt accounts. So it's a balance to try and minimise the amount of borrowing to what's sitting in their net debt.
Thank you. Michael?
Through yourself, Chair, it's probably something I'll jump in from a local government industry side in relation to that question. It's probably the crux of the water issue. Most of the water reserves across the country are not sitting with excess cash sitting in them due to the fact that depreciation historically hasn't really been rated for across local government, which has meant they haven't built up those reserves to be sitting in there to pay for the infrastructure bubble that we're now coming into or in. In most cases we're in. Therefore we're going into a borrowing stage earlier than you would actually anticipate in relation to the whole industry. It's not just Invercargill, and we're going into it later than others. Others have been in it for some time, but we're starting to go into it now in relation to the trigger of no reserve shifting into full borrowing.
So what you're indicating is our less than 100% depreciation position has given us a cushion that can no longer exist.
Correct.
Councillor Dermody?
Yeah, sorry, so in that previous packet it said 17.5 million, Three Waters. So I take from that that's the change.
That's the change.
So what's the start figure? So if we're changing it down by 17.5 million, what are we starting at? What do we plan to start at for Three Waters?
I think Jamie's busy pulling it up.
Sorry, Councillor, we haven't. I don't think we've split it out to that level, but we can. I believe we had it at. It was about 100 million, and we dropped off 17 there, and there's probably about, I think, 9 in non, but I'll get that confirmed as well for you as well.
Yeah, be good to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Mayor Clark?
Yeah, just a further question about this whole concept of needing to depreciate at 100% and to have some large work being scheduled in the next year or two that we might delay. I mean, we sat here at a previous meeting and listened to some advice from the DIA, and they said we were in the top 10% of Three Waters delivery in the country, which I thought was a real credit to our council. I guess a good sign that you have risk within your network is the amount of leaks that you're having. Average in the country 30%, Wellington 50% plus, Invercargill 17%, 1.7. So that would indicate to me that we don't have a lot of leakage. Leakage would be deteriorating pipes. Given that we've done Branksome, a major upgrade of Branksome, and the pipes into the city, is it much of a risk if we move some of these projects that we might be looking to do further off into the future? And to when the environment is more favourable to us?
Through yourself, Chair, it's not something I can answer. I'm not an engineer. However, the engineers have designed our infrastructure plan at medium, kind of that medium risk component, and that's giving the indication of when we need to do the works. They have had a look over what can and can't be deferred in relation to those projects, and that's their indication in relation to it. They are very focused on trying to make sure that that network doesn't break, and we actually do have a functioning network ongoing. So I've got to rely on the expertise of my organisation and my staff. So that's hence why we've got that 10 indicated we're in the top 10%, is because the information coming from that staff is of that level that I can rely on that information coming through. So.
Thank you. Okay, move on to the next slide.
Okay, so this is within the non-waters. So, as we said in the last one, we're starting with a 9.82%. What officers are suggesting to council is that council reconfirms its LTP smoothing approach, which would take a further 3.9% from that. And then we have some requests for funding and some organisational costs, which we will discuss further in public excluded, that are contract linked, which would add further cost to it. As part of our initial organisational user pays policy review, we've identified that our revenue targets may be too high in some areas. So that lack of revenue needs to be filled by rates. But then we have provided some options which we will discuss in more detail in public excluded, which would then drop items back down to 5.8%. Then there is some further options that are available to councillors which could drop it down further to 3.7. So there are mitigations to that 9.82 for non-water, which could bring it down to lower to within that 3 to 5 or higher percentage.
Thank you. Mayor Clark.
So, I guess from a layperson's perspective who might be listening into this, the figures get a little bit confusing. So, it would be nice to know. I mean, I can work out what 3.7% increase on my rates is, but when I add in 24% or 20% for water rates, I get very confused with us splitting it out. So it might be really helpful to be able to tell people exactly what the combination of these two figures will be to them on an annual basis. So, I mean, if I've got 3.7 coming in there, that's great because that's the local government index, which is fine. But 20 or 24% sounds a little bit scary. But when you look at it on an annual basis, it's $220, so that's $4 a week. So it would be interesting to know what the combination of the two is.
Thank you. I'll ask for a reply. Just point out that the whole purpose of clearly and transparently showing the split between non-waters and waters is highly important to local government from this point on. We have central government directions that are forcing us into 3 waters decisions, and we need to make it quite transparent to our ratepayers what that means for them. The splitting of those two for transparency is highly important. Patricia, you have a comment?
Through you, Chair, I had it written on my slides here, but I hadn't actually said what the increase was. For that same average residential property that we use for 3 waters, that 3.7% is an increase of $33.80 a year. So if they were on 3 waters as well, the rates would go up $253.80.
Thank you.
Can you run
Now,
those figures again?
I have a question from Councillor Dermody and from Councillor Ludlow. Councillor Dermody.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just the 2.6 option around organisational efficiency, that's a baked-in number, so that's permanent savings, or is that a one-off, one-year saving?
Through yourself, Chair, it's an item I discussed last time and public excluded in relation to what the quantity of that is, but I'm happy to discuss whether it's permanent or ongoing in relation to that. Look, the nature of the items that we're targeting in relation to that, they're permanent in effect. It's in essence not a structural component, so it's we're able to get it from an operation efficiencies permanent component.
Yeah, so if I may, I just think that's really important because at the start, there was, I think the number was 3.7 for inflation, so it's great to see that, you know, we've tried to minimise that impact on inflation by being more efficient, so that, I think the staff deserve okay on that one. Would nice to be 5%, but thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dermody. Councillor Ludlow.
Sorry, Chair, you made the point I was going to make.
Thank you, Councillor Ludlow. Okay, Mayor Clark.
Just, can I have those figures again? So the 3.7 was how much a year?
$33.80.
And 250 for Three Waters.
It was $220 for, $220 was Three Waters, so in total that's $253.80 for the average residential ratepayer.
And a percentage for that?
Is that 9.51, Jamie? Because that was 9.51%.
Sorry, just to interject there.
Councillor Pottinger, I think you had one, and then Councillor Crackett, you can
just to get some clarity for myself, was I understand that the average ratepayer in Invercargill pays $2,600 a year. Is that correct? Is that what you're working on?
2,300.
2,300.
Well, it says on in our, it says all in any document you read online, it's 2.6. So that's why I was seeking clarity.
We used the average residential ratepayer that we used in the LTP, so that was that same property base. I think it's about 439,000.
Okay, no, that's all right. It's Google probably that.
Thank you,
No, that's all
Councillor.
right. 2.3. Thank you.
Councillor Crackett.
I just actually wanted to clarify that too, was that base average residential rate was the 2,334 number.
So we were calculating it based off your targeted rates. So for water, because they are set targeted rates, it's a percentage on top of that.
Thank you.
Michael.
Through yourself, Chair, I'd just highlight to Council caution on just using their average rates, because now that Three Waters is very much a user pays component, trying to do it as an average is really problematic, because it depends if you're connected or not connected and what services you're connected to, hence why it's switching to the user pays component. When you historically do the average, you're using all the rates across an average property, whereas that doesn't actually work when you're trying to, it's actually lower impact for a predominant number of the city who don't have all four components.
Thank you. It is an old habit to try and use the average, but it is moving into an era where that is probably going to be a historic way of doing things. Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Pottinger.
Yeah, again, just clarity regarding Three Waters. Obviously, it's easy to work out whether you get drinking water and whether you've got wastewater, but the stormwater is a regional city thing now. Obviously, we've got stormwater in the urban areas which are structured in a certain way, but when you go to the non-urban areas on the outskirts of the city, stormwater still has to be dealt with, but it's a bit less. Is it less complicated, or I'm not an engineer, but is there a differential between urban stormwater and, say, the stormwater you might need, Morris Bush or somewhere, or, just somewhere out of town?
Thank you. Through yourself, Chair. Our charges are generally connected to the council council network, and whether you're able to access in relation to the council network. Those that don't have in proximity to that network, the charge is not the same in relation to it.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, that is the end of the public session. If I can have someone to move into public excluded. Councillor Boyle, thank you. Councillor Ludlow, thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you.